Hi, Nicole.
Hi Sid, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for being here. How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thank you for inviting. No, it's good to catch up and have a chat about all things football business.
Sure, sure. So we were talking before, and you mentioned that you played football professionally. So why don't you talk to us about your journey? How do you get started with sports?
Yeah, so for me, I came from a family that was football crazy. So older brother, dad particularly, so they were really my kind of role models growing up. I became a huge Spurs fan just because I followed from them, and that's been my kind of football journey. Was the earliest thing I remember was kicking a ball around on the patio, and that was then sort of cemented as a key part of my life, really. So yeah, always been a fan. Obviously then started playing, and particularly when you're young, you don't see yourself as any different to your brother. For example, I was just playing, as much as he was, and it's
Yeah,
only when you start to then get to school and you start to be told that girls can't play with boys, and then okay, there isn't a girls team, and why don't you actually play a different sport, and all these sorts of things, which unfortunately when I was growing up, women's football, girls football wasn't a big thing in England at all. So I then sort of played a bit of hockey, but I always came back to football. Football was always my thing. And really through people that I knew and people that supported me, they got me back into football.
hmm,
And from the age of 16, I started playing for Wolverhampton Wanderers. That was the team that I played for mainly. When I played, football wasn't professional here, so it was probably semi-professional at best, really. But it was my life. I dedicated all of my time to it, really. And then things became quite tough to manage from a kind of dual career aspect when you're going to university, but you're trying to still play at the highest level possible. But then
sure.
you're also, being having to think about what's your career going to be, how do you start making money, and for me, playing football wasn't really an option.
Yeah.
But I knew I always wanted to be involved in football. So I kind of went down the coaching route, and did quite a lot of coaching. Really enjoyed it. Went to America for some time and um, did lots of coaching over there, but also worked for a soccer franchise from a marketing perspective. And that gave me really the option of saying, do I go down the coaching route or do I actually go down more marketing and sports business route? And I chose the sports business route. So I came back from the States
Mhm.
and moved to London. And again, you need to have a lot of luck with getting into this industry because
Sure.
it's not easy. Everyone tends to want to work in sport or in football,
Hmm.
and it's not, certainly not easy. So I was fortunate enough to get a job working for Kantar Sport, which was a sponsorship research agency, and as well as working there for 2 and a bit years, I also studied part-time for a master's degree in sport management and football business. So I did that whilst I was living in London, which was great. It also allowed me to build my network and really experience being in the sort of hub of city of sport business. So very fortunate to do that, and that really was what sort of kick-started my career in sport business, with a specific look really on football as it kind of transpired, really.
Interesting. Interesting. So what has changed since you got done with football? Like, has it evolved rapidly, women's football?
It certainly has, all around the world, but particularly England. Like I said, from when I was growing up playing, it was never really an option for me to think, okay, I'm going to be a professional player where I'm earning my living through this. It was only
Hmm.
ever going to be something where I'd earn, small amounts of money. Whereas actually now, you've got younger players coming through playing for academy of teams that are playing in the Women's Super League, professional players. We have a fully professional league here. And as a player, 12, 13, 14-year-old girl, if you're playing in the Chelsea academy, for example, then you can genuinely see a career pathway for you to go and become a professional footballer. There are role models there that I didn't
Hmm.
really have. So it's moved on massively, which is obviously great, but there's still a lot of work to do. I would always caveat it with that. And here in England as well, we are more advanced than a lot of countries across the world in the women's game. So there's development all over the globe, but we're all kind of at different levels, which makes it exciting, makes it extremely fast paced, which is why I love working in it. And when you're passionate about something and want to grow the women's game, because you've seen it when you were younger and you want to make an impact and you want to make a change for the better, then it's fantastic. For me, going to work every day is different all the time, but it's certainly got a purpose.
Sure. So how is it compared to women's cricket in England? Because India has a lot of fans from the England women's cricket team. So it's still, I mean, there's still definitely a long way to go, right, as compared to cricket.
Yeah, I mean, women's cricket here as well has had tremendous growth, which is great. Women's sport in general has really, really improved. I think the key thing to recognise is that football is the number one sport in England and actually generally across the world. But for us in England, the favourite sport is always football. And yes, cricket's popular, but in nowhere near sort of comparatively with football. Football is the nation's sport. And so I think other sports, are always kind of looking to football because they're having to compete with that airtime and with that kind of popularity. But women's cricket I always see that sometimes, having worked in football mainly myself, sometimes I see in other sports them do things particularly well and considerably better than in football because they've had to almost work harder for the attention of the consumer, of the fan. Women's cricket here, I mean, we had the World Cup in 2017, and of course England won, beat India at Lords, a packed out Lords, and the team around the ECB and for the women's cricket did a fantastic job at marketing that. It was broadcast across Sky Sports and had fantastic digital content coverage as well.
Right.
And selling out Lords for a women's cricket game was just fantastic. It was also a fantastic match. I mean, both teams contributed to such an entertaining game as well, which was brilliant. And women's cricket here has again really progressed, similar to women's football. New events coming in. What women's cricket have done quite well actually is the kind of double header format as well, where they've had a kind of super. I think it was like the Kia Super League that when it was sponsored by Kia previously. It's kind of moved on, and pre-COVID it was going to be a new event called the 100 that's actually now starting next summer. But what I liked about what women's cricket did around the double header was that you'd have a men's game, in the evening, followed by the women's game.
Right.
Fans who purchased a ticket could watch both.
Right.
And it gave fans an opportunity for a really good price to experience women's cricket, to watch women's cricket, and that really improved the visibility. And of course, that's then helped the investment. It's helped the standards and training facilities and pay and wages and things for the players as well, which is fantastic. In fact, we've just actually heard as well, we've never really done double headers in women's football, but the first double header that we're going to do is for the Charity Shield, that's going to be on the 29th of August. So you're going to have the men's game and the women's game on at the same time at Wembley, which is fantastic. And that will be really interesting to see how a marketing campaign in that sense really gives an opportunity for women's football to be on a platform and allow even more people to experience the sport.
Sure. Okay, so when you talk about investments, let's talk about the current situation. What are some of the issues and basically challenges that are going to be faced by women's football clubs and that they are facing right now?
Well, obviously with COVID, it's hit not just women's football clubs, but football as a whole, and of course sport and the whole world, every industry. There's no industry that hasn't been hit by this. So, I wouldn't say that it's women's football or women's sport that's been hit, on its own. And actually what it's highlighted for lots of football clubs in the men's game is how fragile the industry is and how fragile really the ecosystem is. The reliance on investment and sponsorship funds through commercial partners, media right partners as well. It's really shown actually potentially how unsustainable these clubs are. In the women's game, because it's a game, a product that's still at a very developmental stage, there's not really actually been so much pressure because, in England, for example, media rights, we don't actually get any money from BT and BBC that have the media rights for the Women's Super League here. So it's not like that money is suddenly disappeared for the clubs. That was never there in the first place. Similarly with commercial partners, there aren't that many that have been investing in the game up until now. So in a sense, it was a bit like you can't lose what you haven't already got in that sense. But what it proves to me is that football as a whole needs to find solutions to become more sustainable. That's certainly not just with women's game. That's the men's game and other sport in general. We need to become more sustainable, and I always think that means you need to look at your stakeholders very carefully. And for me, fans being the customers of the sport and of the product, they have to be central to everything that you do. And I think as well, COVID has really made us realise that football without fans is nothing. We need fans for not just, to create an atmosphere at the stadiums and to bring in match day revenues for clubs, but also media partners want fans in the stadiums, sponsors want fans in the stadiums, they want fans connected and engaged digitally as well. So for clubs and associations, they need to work out the best ways to grow your fan base, engage with them, provide them with the best experience, because that's what other industries are doing for their customers to ensure that they keep coming back and spending more money in what is obviously a really, really difficult period for the whole world. So there's lots of challenges across the board, and for every club as well, it's different because no club is the same. Their areas of revenues that they bring into the club are always different. Some women's clubs are associated with their male counterparts who might be Premier League clubs with large amounts of money. Others may be completely independent and not have that financial support from a Premier League club, for example. So lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities in my opinion. And that's where I think as an industry and a group of people working in the women's football, we need to really recognise the opportunities and make sure that as we move forward and come out of this situation from COVID, is that we make the most of those opportunities, and a bit like what we were saying before, not just sort of talk about it, but actually ensure that we deliver on it.
Sure. And you mentioned fans playing a big role. So in what ways can fans actually contribute to helping clubs with additional sources of income?
Well, I think, as a football industry, we've tended not to talk about fans as customers because it doesn't feel right. It makes that relationship between a fan and a club or a, association feel very transactional and salesy, as opposed to, we know as a fan, and I'm obviously a huge fan, you have emotional connection with your club, and it's that emotion that makes the fandom so special, so unique to football. But actually, I feel like clubs, particularly, as businesses and as brands themselves, need to look at their different fan bases, because not every fan is the same. So you need to understand your fan base, just like any other brand, like a Tesco or a Vodafone, understand their customers. And so there's a real element where we've got to understand how important fans are to the entire process. Fans, of course, are going to be critical for matchday revenue. We need them when they're coming back into the stadiums. We need to ensure that they are going to come back when they're allowed to come back, because it's certainly not going to be a given. Yes, we've all missed football being played. At least now we've got it back on our TV screens, but actually we all kind of crave that live experience. But we've all been hit massively from a financial perspective, and also from a health perspective. There's going to be groups of people that might feel very vulnerable and will be very vulnerable to going into these events with fans back, that might actually say, do you know what, we can't go back. They might be told they can't go back because of for health reasons, and they also might decide themselves that they can't go back for health reasons. So I think clubs can't take it for granted to sort of say, well, once we're allowed fans back, all of them will come streaming in. Clubs need to be thinking right now, how do we, even at a reduced capacity, start to engage our fans and ensure that they feel valued when they're coming back into the stadium, and that we provide them with a great experience, better than it was before. Because one thing's for sure is if you go back to your first football game as a fan, you spend a lot of money, which of course you have now even smaller amounts of revenues, money that you are going to actually spend. You need to ensure that if you are going to spend 50, 60 quid on a football ticket, that it's going to give you the value and it's going to give you a great experience. And if it doesn't on that first occasion, first impressions do count. You're certainly not going to then spend it again to go another time. So it's a really important time for football clubs to ensure that they're ready to welcome back fans and provide them with a great experience. And, like I said before as well, it's not just about the match day revenues. It's not just about fans being in the stadium, buying their ticket, buying a shirt, buying food and drink. It's also from a sponsorship point of view. Brands want to associate themselves with football clubs because of their, customer base, which is their fans. They want to be able to interact with these fans. So from a sponsorship point of view, if the fans aren't as engaged or they aren't there, then sponsorship fees, rights fees are going to come down, which is of course going to affect the revenues. And also from a media rights point of view, if no one's in the stadiums, we've seen it before, we've experienced it over the last couple of months, that it's just not the same watching football with an empty stadium. So I really do see fans as being absolutely central to seeing football getting back on their feet.
Sure. So as a person from India who follows EPL, who has been following EPL for the last 18 years, you can say, or two, for me personally, once they've started the fan sounds, in the EPL, for me, it feels just like a normal match. Obviously, for people in the UK who do go for, go for these matches each and every weekend, there's a huge difference, right? So, but yeah, definitely, this is a huge deal. And I have a question, a follow-up to that. Are brands and sponsors willing to take the risk when they know that just one case from any of the top clubs can, cause a huge deal in the whole EPL surrounding the whole situation? They can probably stop the whole league just because of one case. So
one case, yeah. I think it's obviously going to make kind of everybody a bit wary about how do we move forward on things. But I think that's where you've got to have a kind of collaborative approach. And also, from a brand perspective, it's about what is your objective of being associated and sponsoring this particular property, whether it's a club or the league, the competition, whatever it is. And your objective can't sort of hinge on one thing, which might be the case. Somebody gets tested positive with COVID. There needs to be a long-term strategy around any kind of sponsorship. And so I think most brands that are going to be and that are already involved in football are actually thinking on a much greater scale as to how can we showcase not just our kind of brand in terms of selling our product or our service to these fans and these customers, but actually how do we show our values as a brand, what's important to us. And those brands that are showing that they care about the community, that they care about sharing the message of how to stay safe around this period, is going to be really important. So I think that football, and this is where I would always say women's football has such a great, unique platform for brands to be able to come in and be part of something incredibly important in this time of our history, to sort of help us through. It's not going to, and sponsorship isn't always about purely, direct sales to the consumer. It's also about how you can show your corporate social responsibility, what your brand values are.
Yeah.
And it's a key way for brands to show why they're different to their competitors. So sport and football, as we know, is something that is sort of socially embedded in us, and it's that emotional connection. That's why brands love being involved in sport and football particularly. And I don't think that changes because of COVID. I think obviously what changes is financial capabilities and in terms of what can be invested and what can't be because of budget cuts. But that still doesn't mean that activation and the message has to be to a detriment of fewer funds.
Sure. So do you think there should be changes in business models when it comes to associations or football clubs?
I definitely think that we need to become more sustainable. That's what's been really highlighted, from this. So there's no sort of specific business model that I think every club or every association has to have, because it really is dependent on the context and of that club, and specifically, the location, the community that they're in, all those sorts of things. But undoubtedly, there needs to be an understanding that the sustainability is key. And so relying, I mean, we know in football generally, particularly men's football, they spend more money than what they actually bring in. And of course, in any business, you need to invest. Certainly at the beginning, you need to invest more than what you have, because you need to build something.
Yeah.
But I think there needs to be generally across football, and this has been my experience of working in it for over 10 years. It's very short-termist. So the strategies that clubs build tend to be very reliant on winning and performance-based results. And of course, in football, the result on the pitch is everything in that sense. And so there are very few people that can control that result on the pitch. That's the players and the manager, essentially. If you're a marketer for a club, you work in marketing, and your job is to grow the fan base and bring in more attendance at that club. You cannot rely purely on what happens on the pitch, because you could win, lose or draw in any given game. So you need to have a strategy that's built on a lot more than that. And that's where I always argue that fans and fan engagement is a strategy that will allow clubs to grow more sustainably. So ensuring that you build a fan base, which again, I've said many times before now, they are your customer base. You can't build any business in any industry if you don't have a customer base, and if you don't start building loyalty and advocacy for your brand. And you can't do that if you're fully reliant on that winning on the pitch every week, because not even Real Madrid, even Manchester United, don't do that. Yet they still have millions of fans worldwide. So clubs that build their strategies and their business models with fans at the core, fans at the center of that, are going to have more longer-term growth, more profits, more revenues, and build a lot more sustainably.
Sure. So I'd expect an unbiased response, but I'm not sure I'll get it. So what is your opinion on Arsenal Football Club? Really good finances compared to many other teams. They aren't winning. So what do you think they're doing right, and what do you think they can, like when you mentioned winning isn't always the focus, shouldn't always be the focus. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Arsenal, and I will be unbiased, obviously, but Arsenal have done very well, over many years from a commercial point of view, with how they, provide value to their sponsors. And I remember in one of the reports that I wrote when I was doing my dissertation for my master's degree back in 2013, 12, 13, there was an interview with a commercial director at Arsenal at the time, who spoke about CRM, customer relationship management, as being key for bringing in Emirates as a sponsor and keeping Emirates as a sponsor. And of course, they are massively important to Arsenal, as they are going to be investing huge amounts of money. Without CRM, without that ability to understand their customers, which is their fans, then Arsenal wouldn't have been able to have attributed and got that amount of money from Emirates over this long period of time, which would, of course, would have made them a much less successful football club. Obviously, fans, from a fan sort of hat, they're thinking about trophies and silverware, and so they're looking at, okay, Arsenal haven't really competed for the Premier League, for example, for many years. However, when you think about how football has developed so much over the last, let's say, 20-30 years, you have to build long-term business models and strategies so that you're competing over a longer period of time. Clubs now, you have to, it takes a long time to build that kind of model, and so for a club like Arsenal, what they've done particularly well from a commercial kind of setting is be able to develop ways to provide value back to their return on investment, back to their sponsors, which has always led to an increased amount of money coming in from their partners. Obviously, they've also developed the stadium. So when they moved away from Highbury and built the Emirates as well, it's not far off of what obviously Spurs have done recently in terms of moving from White Hart Lane, rebuilding. That was something that was absolutely necessary to do, because the demand for tickets was becoming so big that many fans weren't able to actually go and watch a match, weren't able to engage with the club. So both of those clubs have had to say, right, okay, we need to build a bigger venue. And that now allows Tottenham as well to be able to actually compete with clubs at a higher level for a more longer term sustained period. So that is a good example of a longer term strategy, and obviously resource is a really key part of that. You've got two football clubs there, Arsenal and Spurs, and most Premier League clubs that have commercial departments, marketing departments, fan relationship management, executives and managers that actually work in the football club dedicated to that. If we look at the women's game, for example, that just doesn't exist in the women's game. That's where the clubs there don't have that resource to do that, and so there is less dedicated work done to understand the female football fan, or not just female football fan, but those fans that watch women's football and engage with women's football. And that's definitely an area of growth that needs to come into the women's game, having more dedicated commercial people, marketing people to the women's game. But you've always, as a club, got to balance that with what the fans want, and also the products on the pitch, which is, of course, winning trophies and things like that. And as a Spurs fan, I mean, that's, of course, what I would always, we haven't won anything for a long time. So, we need to have that balance, and you could have endless arguments, with different people about what's the best strategy. And ultimately, it's like with everything, you've got to have balance. What I always believe is I wouldn't want to be a fan of a club that had just huge amount of money coming in from one benefactor, basically, and then suddenly if that benefactor took away that money, you had no club. The club failed to exist because they had to go into administration or suddenly go into non-existence. That to me is what we have to avoid at all costs in football, because football clubs are such a key part of the community, and are massively important for improvements in our society. So, as with most things in life, a good balance is critical. And particularly when I think about it from a women's football point of view, because it's at such a developmental stage, the sport and the business side of it as a whole, there's huge opportunities there to not make some of the mistakes that has happened in the men's game. There's huge opportunity to develop a really entertaining sport where the fans are at the core and the clubs are treating the fans, have great dialogue with the fans, transparent communication with the fans from the off, so that the sport can grow together in that respect.
Right, right. So you mentioned fan relationship management. Is that a form of CRM?
Yeah, so it's kind of the way that the football industry has adapted that philosophy of CRM. So it's fan relationship management, and some top Premier League clubs and clubs all over Europe as well would have now a fan relationship management either department or certainly a person working within that. And a lot of people may think that fan relationship management is sort of a piece of IT software that holds a database and a number of different records of
Right.
fans. And of course that's one element of it, but actually when you speak to people within football clubs that have got really successful FRM strategies, they describe it more like a sort of philosophy, and it is that philosophy that goes across the whole club and culture, that is about having the fan first and the fan at the center of everything that they do. And so in order to understand what your fans want, across any kind of range of different questions, and certainly from a commercial point of view, you need to know how to communicate with your fans to monetize from them. So you need to know how to originally, begin an engagement, kind of two-way communication with that fan. You need to learn about that fan and understand, what are their buying and consumer habits. Are they, for example, are they a fan that is a season ticket holder that comes to every single game every season without fail? Or maybe they're more of a casual fan that comes to maybe 5 to 10 games a season. Maybe they are a real one-off fan that's maybe come once or twice. And for each of those different fans, the club needs to have a different strategy for how they are engaging and valuing that fan. Because what's important for clubs, of course, is to understand what is the lifetime value of that particular fan. And you're going to have a range of different values because of the different connection that fan has. I mean, if Tottenham looked at me, for example, I've been a season ticket holder for 21 years. How have they when you think about the lifetime value that they've had of me, and it's not just about me, it's also family that I go with, friends that I come with, all of the secondary spend that I will have at the stadium, or do I buy a shirt every year? Do I subscribe to the monthly TV channel as well at an extra cost, all these sorts of things. So that's why fan relationship management and having a philosophy, having a structure where you can learn about all your different fans is absolutely key. And that is just best practice across any business. That's what big brands would have and rely on outside of sport. It's just that sport and football have been a bit slow to picking that up. And like I said, in many Premier League clubs, they will have that in place now. But of course, football's huge, and even in England, we have 92 professional teams, and that's just in the men's game. And then if we look at women's football as well, there's huge opportunities there to build those philosophies and build those structures so that they can learn more and research more about their fans.
Definitely. Yeah, I totally agree. And neither we are. And it's good that you're working towards it. And you've worked as an agent, right? To represent football players and athletes. Uh, Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I never thought that I would be an agent or an intermediary, as they're called now. It wasn't part of my kind of career plan or path, if you like. But I spent a couple of years working at Tottenham Hotspur Women, actually, as their general manager, and that gave me such an opportunity to build a great rapport with players. I saw the incredible commitment and determination that players had to be able to play the sport that they loved, and obviously having been a player myself, I certainly not to the level that they were playing at mine, but I had a element where I could recognise the work and the commitment that they put in to be able to play. But these players, when I was working at Tottenham, they were had a full-time job as well, so they were playing football in the evening. Some of them were parents. Some of them were studying as well, so they all pretty much had dual careers and other things that they needed to focus on. Some players were traveling, 2 and a bit hours each way to training in the evening, and still playing at an incredibly high level. And there just wasn't enough awareness of that, in the country, across people. They just sort of thought, oh, well, they're a footballer, great, they must get paid a load of money like the men do.
Right.
And it's just not the case. When I left Spurs, I went to start my own consultancy, which is what I do now. And one of the areas that I didn't want to leave from working at a club was the relationship that I had with the players and the ability to help them. And at that time, I didn't really know what help like that meant. I just knew that I wanted to help them. And so one of those ways was to register to become an intermediary. And because of my vast network of clubs in and around Europe, it allowed me to help the players that I was representing to, speak to clubs, get other, contract opportunities. But critically for me, it's less about moving player from club A to B. And the kind of traditional agent that most people think about. For me, it's more about being that support network that players need, and supporting them with sort of their careers outside of football, so off the pitch. So there are some players that really want to get into media work or, commercial work, or understand the business of football a lot more. And so I help them in that sense, get them some additional work, get them more experience where they can carry on playing with their football, but also learn about other areas of the game as well. All with the view to, them becoming, when they retire from football, becoming a really key part of the ecosystem of women's football, so that they can drive change as well. And that's really important to me. So the role it's tough, it's never ending. It's sort of 24 hours a day that you're speaking with players, you're speaking with clubs. It's quite hard in that sometimes it's quite hard to accept how little money there is in the game, and especially when we think about England, it being a professional league in the Women's Super League. If you're one of the top players in that league, one of the maybe top 3 clubs, your Chelsea's, Man City's and Arsenal's, then you're certainly doing pretty well financially. But there are still players then towards the bottom end of that league, and then in the tier 2, that are generally having to also work another job to be able to make a decent living, and that becomes quite frustrating at times. And we have to do more to develop and ensure there are a minimum sort of level of standard for players, not just from a wage point of view, but from a facilities point of view. Marketing of the product as well is really important. So yeah, it's a very wide-ranging role, but incredibly valuable. And when you can have an impact on somebody's life, like I can, working with these players, then it's really worthwhile.
Wonderful. Well, wish you all the best with that. It's great what you're doing for football. I won't say women's football, for football in general. And
Thank you very much.
well, Nicole, thank you so much.
Thank you. No, thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. You shared so much information. And one thing about this is, I hope the Indian listeners, people involved in the sports industry, can take, learnings from you and use it in India as well. Obviously, UK, very developed when it comes to football, and hopefully India can adopt some of the practices and become a better footballing nation.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's huge opportunities in India for, football as a whole. But yeah, certainly with my hat on from a women's football perspective, we've got obviously the World Cup that's due to be there in September is now going to be obviously early 2021. There's huge opportunities there to engage with fans. And I think the key thing for any, country that's developing their women's football provision is visibility. There needs to be more visibility of the sport, of the players, because without those players being role models, it's really hard for those players coming through, young girls, to sort of see who they could be. So the more that you can provide that visibility to the players, the better.
Yeah.
And there's just huge potential in a country like India, and I've spoken to a number of different people in the country over the last sort of 4 or 5 months, and I think it's a really exciting time. But strategy is key. Having a clear mission and knowing what you're trying to achieve, and again having a collaborative approach is really important as well. So I would encourage anyone that obviously any of your listeners that want to follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn, please do. Always really happy to have conversations with people. I'm also on Instagram. NA Sport is the name of my company. So yeah, please do follow and reach out if you'd like to have a chat.
Definitely. And your LinkedIn and email, if you could share them.
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Nicole Allison. You'll find me on LinkedIn as the owner or the founder, managing director of NA Sport. So you'll find me there. And also, as I said, Instagram. I'm also on Twitter as well, Nicole Allison too. Email is all on my LinkedIn page as well. And also have a website, www.nasport.co.uk.
Sure. All right. Thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate it. And
Thanks, Sid.
guys,
Great to connect and chat with you.
wonderful. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.